can start.
Okay, so Natalia, welcome to Cali. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have you here. Natalia, for all our friends here and by Zoom, is a very distinguished journalist from Ukraine. I met her last year in Kyiv. She is working very hard to make things known, to spread the reality of this war and the Ukrainian point of view about all the situations that are taking place. In this war crimes that Natalia is investigating with the Reckoning Project are unbelievable to be happening in the 21st century. But this is the reality. We have a big war in Europe, which is a danger not only for Ukraine, which is already suffering the effects of the war, but also for Europe and for the world, for the instability that it creates around the world. And there are proofs.
Acabo de ser designado anfitrión del ensayo. Qué singular. A ustedes también se les cayó la conexión, ¿no? Bien, bien, pensé que era el único.
I should probably tell to those who are here, I arrived just some hours ago, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have regarding what would be of your interest is if I'm already here, as I'm covering all kind of news being fully based in Ukraine and in Kyiv. But with this presentation, my task is I want to to lay a scene on what's going on with the war crimes and what evidence we have and how we obtain this evidence to speak with full authority, which I'm trying to do within the next 10-15 minutes. Maybe to being kind of a bit more newsworthy, just today while flying here, I've seen the news on some of the Russian official channels with some of the international or some of the observers, let's say like that, came to observe so-called elections in the occupied Ukrainian territories, in particularly in the town of Melitopol, which is a very tiny town. Nobody would ever hear about it in South America. There was one of the rather controversial Uruguayan politicians there. And I look at this video and to say what I was thinking that, you know, he probably disregarding what the opinion of these politicians, what he knows, what political force he represents, probably he himself wouldn't understand where he was brought to. Because if for me it was a nice, peaceful Ukrainian town in Zaporizhia region, which I knew from my childhood was a place you go and you have fruits, grapes, peaches growing there. That was and especially like cherries, which the town is famous for. Now it's also the town where one of my colleagues, a Ukrainian journalist, Victoria Roshina, who was my junior, I used to run with me, disappeared in last September. Since then, nobody heard about her. She managed, after the occupation of this territory, 2 years, to somehow travel there, which was already the risk. And we're not sure what's happening with her. So a lot of people were thinking whether she is in one of the detention centers, because today, unfortunately, this particular place is a small town of the occupation, are major known for us as a places where people are detained. And we know that there are the basements just in a different town near Melitopol, Berdyansk. Just our reporters, just our people talk to, it's in Zaporizhia region, to almost 10 people who were in the very same prison cell, detained, tortured, and if to understand who they were a farmer, a student, a teacher, a local village head, and people of different kind. And one of wives of one of the person who was there really literally told me that, you know, it's enough to have your own opinion. That's the reason to be detained and treated in a very severe way. And I think that's endemic system of the crimes which is there is not largely not yet understood by the world to extent, especially in some of areas. In Ukraine, Ukrainian General Prosecutor Office registered officially 125,000 possible breaches of the alleged war crimes, which is a huge number. And of course, there is a challenge to investigate it. Many of them are, of course, connected to the damage of the residential areas, but we're speaking about hundreds, thousands, and tens of the thousands of the victims and the survivors. Why I'm speaking with such authority? So my background is in human rights reporting for the years prior to the full-scale invasion. I've been conflict reporter, covering the conflicts all over the globe, and since 2014 focused on the stories connected to human rights violation in occupied Crimea and in the Donbass following the war. And since the full-scale invasion, we joined this initiative together with the international lawyers, our lawyers of different origins, Syrian, some of them, they come from the experience of other war crimes and other conflicts. Also international reporters who also covered previous wars, previous genocides. And with our methodology, we have the group of the mainly Ukrainian field reporters who are very distinguished in human rights reporting, but we developed together the methodology in which we speak just for the direct survivor, direct possible witnesses of the war crimes. So each person we speak potentially can testify in the court. So it's not somebody who just heard something. It's somebody who lived through something which potentially can be the war crime and can be later there should be responsibility for this. Within the last years, almost 2 years since then, we speak to them in a very detailed manner so they can recreate what happened to them. And we observe, just us, in very small team compared to the national law enforcement system, that all types of the violation which exist in Geneva Convention are happening on systematic level. And I'm speaking about abduction, tortures, executions, and as well all the crimes connected to the missiles attacks. Because for us, it's also very important to prove that it's not really the random tragedy, the collateral damage of the war when people are, dying because bombs are falling. So in a video, I'd like to show you, for starting the scene, we have some of the quotes of the people to whom we talked to, which would be very representative. And then I also explain where we are after 2 years of this full-scale invasion. Sorry for the rather gruesome image. It's not the worst version of this image, because it might be painful, but it's really not even the worst shots you'll see. But maybe that would also understand the nature of our work and what the people in Ukraine lived through.
If you give me a sec, I have my company upstairs. Give me a second.
Okay, so let's just add something up, okay? So now we're going to play these images, which are she already anticipated, and afterwards we'll open the play for.
And then I'll have the presentation.
And then you continue with the questions. Thank you, sorry. So then after the video, we just continue with the presentation of the reckoning project, and then we open the place for questions.
Perhaps, Ambassador, we could gain time here while we're waiting. We're going to start.
Yeah, it's really 4 minutes. It's very short.
I was going to. It's an old trick in television, so it's not necessary.
Okay. There is no sound.
Ay, tiene sonido. ¿Se le puede poner sonido? I just asked them.
No sé.
Sound. We're waiting for the
Yeah.
sound.
Yeah.
But you still can read.
¿Me puedo poner pausa? Por favor. No se puede.
Когда папу забрали, я вообще пытался не думать об этом.
Никто не объяснял, где папа. Нам говорили, один дядя вообще сказал тоже, то, что он вернется через 7 лет.
Они сначала спросили у меня, давай мы вас отправим троих в одну семью ненадолго, на время, пока папа сможет нас забрать, или мы вас можем отвезти. Или в приют. Я сказал, я не дам ответа, пока с папой не свяжусь.
Ту картину, яку побачила я, коли заглянула туди, де це спортзал, де сама більша кімната. Оце справжнє пекло. Пекло в тому вигляді, в якому малюють на старовинних іконах. В світлі, в такому приглушеному, чисто від свічок, постаті людей один коло одного сидять.
Вони не били по голові, це по ногах, по тулубу. Було всього декілька ударів. Чим такі удари, якісь зековські, коли б'ють ладошками, зразу по двох ушах. Дуже сильно. Да. І таке відчуття, що як контузія в тебе. І коли ти падаєш, тебе піднімають, роздягають. 2-3 години ти взагалі стоїш голий, холодно, просто замерзаєш.
Очень много погибших, много раненых. Раненых очень тяжело, с ампутациями. Ну и погибшие люди тоже очень сильно повреждены тела. Море крови, стоны, крики «помогите».
Меня как-то оглушило на время, или я не знаю, я не поняла. Потом встаю такая и смотрю ногу, а тут у меня она вся в крови. Вот. Вот что сейчас с моей ногой.
А мужчина этот меня хватает, тянет, говорит: не смотрите, не смотрите. Я вырвалась, подбежала, приподняла. Я вижу, да, я вижу, это он, я вижу так живот скрытый, знаете, как кожа вот так снятая. И я вижу полностью все его внутренности.
И он у меня спросил, как ваше здоровье. Естественно, я поняла, что это врач. Я ответила, что все у меня хорошо. И он сказал: ну, если хорошо, то завтра будем снимать швы. Я даже не спросила, где эти швы. Только он сказал, что у нас нет обезболивающего. Вы будете терпеть? Я говорю: буду терпеть. Авиабомба упала вот за этим окном. Где я была, я не знаю. Но где-то была, что осталась жива.
Это запуганные люди, они издевались так над ними, просто это, зверски. Они были избиты до такой степени. Это стоит мужчина, мужчина, но на нем нету живого, это просто сплошная гематома. Рассказывали, что и уши ток пускали.
Артобстрел. Роддом.
Это была девочка, которой мы пытались оказать помощь. К большому сожалению, ребенок был уже мертв. Нам не удалось спасти ни мать, ни ребенка. Я не смог положить младенца в пакет с женщиной. Это сделал мой коллега. Тяжело.
So thank you for watching. And I think what is important for me to say, some of these people you've seen, we were talking during the first year of the war. But after working 2 years, we can understand that, it's not the aberration of something like happening. So for instance, if you speak about the occupied territories, would it be the territories which is occupied in the north or in the east, in the south, at the early stage of the war in March 2022, or in summer 2022, or in 2023? We can see, for instance, the very similar way how, for instance, people are treated, how in occupation, the police station are kind of moved and the torture chambers are created there, the way how people are interrogated. So for instance, electrocution is endemic. And even if our team spoken for over 150 people who've been under the detention with a different pretext, most of them were women, men electrocuted in a very similar way. Mainly, of course, there are a lot of males who were detained. But by the way, what is also very important, we understand that when even what our lawyers mentioned, that honestly, even our survivors and witnesses, somehow they downplay how they were treated. So they actually don't go too much into the details when you really understand that they're saying but the others were severely beaten. The cases of the enforced disappearance and the cases when people were also, some of them, know that I spent this time in the detention center, but I know about this person who disappeared. And what is important to speak now, why I also started about the, so-called elections and further occupation. Of course, we were able to record more people in the areas which were liberated, like first year of the war, and like in Kherson and Kharkiv, the regions which were liberated during first year of the full-scale invasion, but we went on the second year, and we understand that longer the occupation is lasting, it just more times people are detained. There are more chances that they won't be freed, and the situation is not changing. The same things if you're speaking about another type of the crime, about the indiscriminate attack on the infrastructure and on the civic objects. we would, even from the video you see, we would have the attacks on shopping mall, the attack on the residential area and the train station. But for instance, the film which I investigated was about the attack on the evacuation on the Kramatorsk train station when 59 people were killed and over 100 were traumatized. When we looked into the discussion, even if the Russia tried to use different types of propaganda and speaking like, okay, there was a reason, there was some Ukrainian military there, we would be able to identify that in that particular case, the weapon which was used was a highly precision weapon, and this type of the weapon is used for destroying the humans. It can't destroy the military equipment or something like that. So we can also claim that it's a deliberate attacks on the civilians to stop them from evacuation. The very same, recently, there was the second indictment for not for Vladimir Putin, but two major Russian military. One, the commander of the Black Sea Fleet, and the second was the commander of the Air Forces, Kabylyash and Sokolov. But when you look, they were particularly charged with the attacks on the civilian infrastructure in winter 23. But we understand that the same people were in charge, for instance, when there were attacks happening on, when the particular type of the bomb was used on the case we were investigating in the attack on the town, a peaceful town far away from the front line, Kremenchuk, where the very average shopping mall, which every single country today has, would it be Argentina, was destroyed with one blast by a particular type of weapon, which can in one moment destroy the huge shopping mall. But what is important that prior to that attack, three similar attacks all on different scale by the very same, from the very same base were committed. And then later, half a year, a month, some weeks after, there was the very same attack on the near Odessa happening, and the over 60 people die in Dnipro, the big town in Ukraine, when the very similar type of bomb was fallen on the residential area. While we were researching the attacks on the maternity wards, and now one of my colleagues is working on the documentary comparing the experience on the attacks on the maternity wards in Syria and in Chechnya, we really see the very same tactics, how the hospitals particularly targeted, with the reason that, especially if it's a frontline town like Mariupol, people can live in a town where there is no grocery store or even where there is no, bread or food. But when there is no hospital, the people need to flee, and then the town can be overtaken. And when we compare the attacks on Grozny and Aleppo and Mariupol, we understand drastic similarity. So we can speak. I also didn't mention the attack on the story of the deportation of children, which is particularly, I think, something which people in Argentina would understand. And official number is still about 19,000 of the Ukrainian people, children, which were taken. I think that it was very, very important in March 2023 that there was the arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin and his person in charge of the children. And to some point, it's interesting that we still believe that it's very important that this decision by ICC has been taken, because there was system built. The system built in order, it could be grown even more. So it's interesting that later investigation also shown that, for instance, one of the leaders of the Единая Справедливая Россия, the Just Russia, second biggest pro-government party, himself adopted a girl of like 2 years or something, to his family. So there was some evidence given by the journalists. So we understand that they not fully stopped it, but at least why for us it's very important that these decisions of the ICC coming up, that if my previous colleagues who covered previous wars were speaking about the idea of justice, because we also believe that a lot of things are happening because of this impunity. these decisions today are very critical for possible prevention. So for instance, for last year, we've been speaking a lot about, can there be any decision regarding the attacks on the civilian infrastructure? And it happened, because I think that the challenge for us, and this is a challenge of the media, because in our case, what we are doing, have journalists and the lawyers. We record the testimonies, and the very same testimonies can be used for the journalistic material, for the articles, for the films, with particular level of sensitivity, but the lawyers can do submissions to ICC, to OIC, to UN, to different bodies, and also we pass with the consent of the people, them for the Ukrainian prosecutors. But of course, there is a limit to how much can be investigated. So we think that all venues of justice are possible. That should be the national jurisdiction, but there is, reason to how much international public care about the national jurisdiction of Ukraine. And these are not largely symbolic, but very important decisions by ICC. So I think that they can stop this flag of impunity. But still, we should understand that, for instance, a lot of interesting things are happening. So the town of Bucha became very famous for international public and for the Ukrainian public because it was opened very fast. The town, which is technically suburbs of in Kiev, and out of almost 500 people who died in this small town, the many were executed. So we see that they were shot down in head. It's not really like the people who died because of shrapnel or shelling. But even with that, we later seen that Vladimir Putin has given the medals for particular military who were in Bucha. We recently had the news that one of the people who were military in Bucha adopted the Ukrainian kid, which makes it extremely ironic and sad. So we really think that these things should be stopped, and we couldn't treat the war as the usual these crimes as a collateral damage of the war. It's not just about the people who are suffering. The wars make people suffer, and there is especially in the frontline towns, it's true that people can die because of the shelling, but why we differentiate the war crimes from the general tragedies of the war. And I think that's something important. It allows us not to be that powerless, because what we believe that if we think about this war as a just tragedy, it leaves us powerless because we can't do much. But if we think about that as about the crimes, we think that there could be justice served, and there is our responsibility to investigate these stories. And in modern world, it's possible. The previous crimes, it's rare when it happened that the crimes were investigated while the war is ongoing. But the more I research myself and the more I look, would it be any historic evidence about the illegal actions of human rights violations? If you come years after, you still lose. What we also understand in the trials of early 21st century, usually the people were charged just with that evidence which was recorded. And so many incidents were not recorded. So we have a chance to bring justice to more people. And my final would be, and again, I'll be happy to answer a lot of other issues. So for instance, one of my last investigation was about the occupation of the nuclear power station in Zaporizhia, which is the biggest nuclear power station in Europe, which is effectively for 2 years occupied. And we can debate what could be the risk, but when I talked with the leadership of the nuclear leadership and the management, and it just mere presence of the military in such objects cannot be tolerated. And unfortunately, the international law doesn't really make big difference between occupation of the nuclear power station and any other facility. However, it's more dangerous. So there are things even we can't do for this particular moment, but I think that in Ukraine, there are a lot of things to make for maybe some change for prevention. So for instance, there is a necessity to change something that it won't have the temptation that anybody would occupy a nuclear power station. The people who do that could have the maybe different level of the sanctions if it happens. Also, for instance, I personally talked to the people the staff of the nuclear power station, and different times it's still an occupied area which has been tortured and detained, which is also explain what is the nature of the station. However, for instance, it's not in the mandate of the International Atomic Agency to even record the tortures of the staff, because they're looking at some other parameters. So everybody assumed that, and even the staff there assumed that if there would be the monitors from International Atomic Agency coming, and if there is, the information about tortures of the employees, that would be somewhere recorded. But we understand there is this gap, which is just move us nowhere. And the organization in charge of currently running this station, Rosatom, is going on to build a station in Egypt and Turkey. And for instance, they do sign the memorandums with some of the agencies in Brazil, in Nigeria, in Indonesia. So for us, it's it's extremely important to look, into the big picture. And my final would be, Ambassador, you just mentioned Crimea. So I've been reporting the Crimea. I wrote a book about the occupation of Crimea. I've been reporting every year since 2014. I've been there during the moment of annexation. And to be honest, I think we underestimated the importance and significance, because for Crimea, for me, would be the answer, what happens if you do nothing? Because at that time, I think there was an agreement of the West that let's give Crimea to Putin, and nothing happened. Later, the Donbass has happened. But I always was looking at Crimea from the human rights perspective. There were indigenous population, Muslims, Crimean Tatars, who were disproportionately targeted and persecuted, charged with various fabricated cases. But by now we understand that 8 years of occupation managed to help Russia to move Crimea to become the military base from where Ukraine is shelled, without occupying the Crimea and without the Kerch Bridge. There won't be possible the occupation of Ukrainian South, because all the weapon is coming through this Kerch Bridge. Also, the indoctrination of the children and the system of where the Ukrainian children are kind of trained in a different manner started in Crimea and was tested. Now, most of the children brought to Russia, many of them are brought from Crimea in the very same kind of recreation camps where they are. And also the Crimean prisons become the prisons where a lot of people from occupied territories are moved and then, detained. So we can also say that it was a long-lasting preparation. And therefore, we also should bring this into the general picture. Of course, there are numbers of the questions I would be ready to answer and a lot to say, but I probably would finish like that, just to speak that we feel that today also one of the arguments of the Kremlin is say international justice is not really happening. It takes too long. There is a lot of global hypocrisy. Some crimes are investigated, some are not. But what we believe in Ukraine, with the access to Ukrainian territory for the internationals, journalists, or anybody, with this will which is existing, there is no reason not to investigate. If you don't do it in Ukraine, it means you don't do it anywhere. So it's really the good opportunity for the world to think. And if in our case, just something would be done for prevention, maybe we can take more seriously the international law and the violation that if it's not working now, even this indictments and the warrants which are issued now, they do matter. And we also should fight this idea of the impossibility to deal with that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you on behalf of everyone for your presentation. I think you gave so much information that I don't know where to start. Was thinking about mostly the children and the Argentinian reference you made during our last dictatorship and how that affected, generations stuff. And I was just thinking about, besides the part of the war, why do you think that this story should be told, and how to deal with people from faraway countries that maybe they just follow the war, but just maybe are not that aware?
And I'm really journalist, first of all, coming from more background on the human rights and disregarding, we speak about the real politique, and I'm also like speaking in the international security forums. I still believe that this is something universal, you know, and when last year I've been also running the project on, which was called Connecting Continents, on bringing the journalists and intellectuals and editors from Asia, Africa, and Latin America as well to Ukraine. No, we figure out that disregarding, we speak about the interests, you know, the journalist from Nicaragua right away while speaking to the teacher who was tortured in Kherson told like, that's exactly how it's happening in our place. And the Uruguayan editor would speak about the idea of the trials. And as you see, you know, you're speaking about the children in Argentina. I had a chance to speak in the audience in Nigeria. And right away when I was speaking, there was a lady telling about the Boko Haram and the stolen girls. So in a way, when we started to research, we understand the separation of the children. It happens in North Korea today. There is a relevance, and I still believe that disregarding, you know, what a political affiliation you are, this can be, and I understand that such dictators as Putin, they try to divide societies, use the existing division lines in politics and everywhere, use the polarization existing in the societies. They did it in Ukraine, and they're trying to use this, you know, partisan position in every single place where they want to meddle. But I do think it's something which people understand. That's why disregarding their political views, affiliation, and the history. And it's not me, I'm very cautious about, you know, comparing the sufferings, because, you know, it's also very sad story, you know, to discuss whose tragedy is bigger. For me, the idea is it's happening now and we need to stop. And if it's possible to stop, let's do that. I do understand that in some countries it's more different. I'm also worked in a lot of different places globally. And for me, you know, I would feel as well empathy to the suffering of the Syrians, to the sufferings of the people in
No, I'm actually inspiring others too to do it. So you cannot, you know, do everything. So
on the Russian soldiers, what is very interesting, when we started to investigate, we were all very much disappointed because usually there won't be call names, there won't be insignia, the people would be in balaclavas and they would hide their identity. So for us, when we talked to our analyst, was the question, how we investigate all these things, because we don't know, who are they, who are exact soldiers. But when our analysts look at that and international law, they said, we can see the system of impunity. We can see that actually the Russian soldiers, because there are some rules of the war, and the rules of the war tell that if somebody is doing something wrong, at that moment the senior should stop the soldier. But we see the endemic culture of impunity. It's actually one of the tactics. So in a way, we speak less, and unfortunately, usually I had a chance to talk to the journalist from Kosovo, who was investigating crimes of the Serbian army. And I think she said that she managed to talk to some Serbian soldiers like 2015, some years ago. So I think sooner or later they would speak. At this stage, they are still totally, terrified, or, there is a system which, as you say, as I mentioned earlier, these awards, which are given to some of the Russian soldiers, that actually encouraging them. So there is still the system encouragement in the Russian army. That's why I think it's very important to have these trials also, the particular perpetrators who committed something, but look at the medial level, who used to run the prison, who was the commander of that region, but also why the idea of the special tribunal for the crime of aggression, where the Russian leadership can be charged, is also extremely important. That it's really not the war on that particular level, it's on all kind of levels. But I think that sooner or later they would speak, but time is required. But now they are unfortunately just encouraged.
So Rodrigo Sebastián Melgar asks, do you have a publicly available dataset? I was planning on doing an article on Russian war crimes and would really appreciate working.
So we don't publish, we don't need this database, because also the security of the survivors for us is paramount, and we don't need unnecessary to publish their names or things like that, because also for the various reasons. The way we worked, based on the biggest stories we find out and the incidents, we do films and articles. We mainly cooperate with international media publications. So we were published in the Atlantic, in New York Times, in various other publications. And some of our films are available online, like about the attack on the Kramatorsk train station or about the deportation of the children. I'm in particular welcoming the audience here in Buenos Aires on Thursday at 7 p.m. and the Recoleta Cultural Center will show 4 films about one of the deportation of the children, another about the occupation of the one village, and also the occupation of the southern Ukraine and attacks on the hospitals. So there is enough of the public information in our media work. We publish the book, we do the other things. But we definitely don't really have the database, because we think that it's actually mainly for the security reason and for the personal protection of the survivors. If it's necessary, on demand, on record, particular stories of the particular crimes, we're happy to collaborate, but of course in a cautious manner.
Of course. I'm going to just give the mic
just
to Guillermo Garcia, who's the CARI's communicator secretary.
Just to,
sorry,
nice, because that's important. First, to thank you to be here. As a former journalist, why it's so important to have journalism as a profession, and what's important to the world to still have professionals like yours. I would like to ask you this, taking the advantage that you're a journalist. A very short editorial answering to the neorealism scholars' arguments, who likes to justify the invasion, talking about history and geopolitical issues. It would be very important for this house to have that kind of arguments from yourself.
I do think that the history shouldn't be the reason. If we really get into that, then we break the international order. Then we can understand that borders don't matter. And we can challenge from which time do we start, who belong to what. So I think that the most important, and it's interesting, like I was today asked by Argentinian journalists how we treated the interview of Vladimir Putin to Tucker Carlson. And there is a temptation to debunk a lot of myth because it's actually factually not correct what he said. And historians can do that. I think there is a temptation, but my idea is not to get to these debates, because if we do that, then we discuss that every country which ever had somewhere different history of the shared borders, then would claim something. Right after that interview of Vladimir Putin, I received the email from the son of the former Mongolian region globally.
So the last from the audience, beyond the arrest warrant issued by the ICC against Putin, some countries said they would not arrest him if he traveled to those countries. Are you still confident that Putin will be tried for crimes committed in Ukraine?
I'm more than confident that he will be, because usually it happens. The question is about the time, and our will is that it's about when. And our Syrian colleagues, and maybe it won't be level. One of them lives in Germany, and also he was participating in the Koblenz trial. It's when one of the Syrian generals traveled to Germany, asked for refugee, but was found out that he is there, and he was considered like one of the butchers of Syrian war, and he was arrested, and there was a positive decision. I see that the Russians are pretty reckless, and if they maybe won't travel now to Nice or to Monaco or to Biarritz, the chances they would travel to Seoul, to Bangkok, to Dubai, very high, because they're pretty reckless in the way how they behave. On the warrant, it's interesting that still Vladimir Putin didn't travel to the BRICS summit to South America. And wherever it is, it at least was something for him. And it mattered. And this matters. And I still think that in the end, the courts are extremely important, and they are treated more seriously. And somebody would doubt, like, these two new generals, the commander of the Black Sea Fleet. Yes, he might be not traveling from outside of Russia because he's forbidden. Where are his grandchildren and children? Are the chances that they have their flat in Paris? Might be. Would you like to have your father or grandfather charged with the crimes against humanity? Probably not. And maybe I think that's our answer for this encouragement, because before he was receiving the medals from the Russian president, now they show, because I think for the first year, Russia tried to persuade the world that trials would never happen. It would take in 10 years. but it's going on. So I think it's a good sign. That's why all other things, universal jurisdiction in other countries, they are symbolic, but not just symbolic. They are actually showing that, we care at least. It's a minimum, but we care.
And regarding your vision of global affairs, right? We know Russia's economy is actually getting stronger despite the sanctions. And also Putin has been reelected, as you said. And another issue is that Trump could easily win the election and maybe change the foreign policy towards more isolationist kind of. So what do you think about the scenarios you can imagine for the near future?
I do think that there is a lot now discussion about possible re-elections of Donald Trump, and this is something disturbing for me as a Ukrainian. Of course, it's not up to us. I covered US president elections like all last 4 campaigns, so I'm pretty much aware of the situation. And as a citizen, as a journalist, and with all the quotes of what Trump tells, of course, it's very disturbing. We still have some time to catch up, and I hope for some kind of Europe being more involved, but there are some particular things where you cannot somehow totally, for instance, like the idea that, the US won't be in NATO. But I think it's not up to me really to totally speculate on whether it happened or not. I happened to talk to some of the Republicans as a journalist to ask in the interview. They really just saying like, look, like Trump promised to do that or that, but he never did that in terms of, international relations. I think for the Ukraine, it's very important now to work bipartisan with the Congress to extent it's possible. But the main point for me is, I think that there was misunderstanding also by a lot of European states that they didn't invest enough to security. I also grew up in the country where there was no war. I grew up in the country where the last war was Second World War. There was no war in Ukraine till 2014. And for people living in Kiev, there was no really war like now before 2022. And I was also in the denial that, the full-scale invasion happened because it's impossible in modern world. Now I believe in anything, and I understand this understanding that if you really listen very carefully to what Vladimir Putin says, it's really about the perpetual war as their way to run the country, to mobilize the country. So we don't see any single sign from them differently. I'm, as somebody coming more from human rights background rather than from the security background, was always puzzled by the idea between, security and human rights and democracy. But when you also talk to historians, you understand, I don't like the idea of the Cold War, but there were times when you still have some funds and ammunition to defend yourself, but you still develop your democracy. It's not totally against. And I think that that's unfortunately, Ukraine doesn't want to spend money on military, but there is no other way. And if you really speak about our experience of the last 2 years, Ukraine was liberated in the military way, where it was possible to push. We don't see occupation. We have largely normal life in Chernihiv region, in Kharkiv region, in Bucha. We understand what is the alternative. We see clearly a different way of alternative. We clearly see that if there would be, any kind of some of the peace, which is, it's not even offered. First of all, it's not offered to Ukraine. There is no such signs. The signs about negotiations are mainly coming from some pundits in some of the American think tanks, or somebody else. Like there is no the thing. But what most are suggesting for Ukraine is really the occupation. And I explained what is occupation in details, what is for the Ukrainians. So we know that the previous agreement, which is called the Minsk Agreement after 2014, gave time to Russia to fortify the area, to prepare better for the war, to have better storage of would really say that Ukraine is really pluralistic democracy to extent it's possible during the war even now. And if Ukraine didn't change it, which was like the victory of 2014 peaceful protest by the Ukrainians, and I think that that is the most important things why Ukraine is defending yourself. So first of all, before answering this question, I want to say that if people in Moscow try to say that democracies are weak and the autocracies are strong, I want also to challenge this idea, because if Ukraine hasn't been democracy, there won't be the support for Ukraine, there won't be this army capable to fight back. There would be the corrupt politician who probably would solve our own country. So we understand that a lot of things with transparency, with the unity of the country, came especially because of the reforms happening after 2014, which in 2022 Ukraine, was an democracy with different parties united again with this idea. The answer on the elections, I think that what is democracy? Democracy is not just about elections, they're extremely critical, but it's about the laws and system. The Ukrainian constitution allows that there won't be elections during the martial law and during the war. And sometimes we understand that, in different places, politicians turn to use this opportunity of the martial law for their state. Who would challenge the idea that there is real war in Ukraine? Who would challenge that, like, oh, it's a pretext. The martial law is a pretext to have the political kind of stronghold around my party. Not really. So, every 90 days, the Ukrainian parliament is voting to prolong this martial law. But what is the mood in the Ukrainian public? First of all, we have now, Ukraine didn't have a big army. The Ukrainian army is an army of the civilians who maybe were mobilized after 2022. So out of 300,000 people, we have over 1 million people. Now they are on the front line. Would they have the vote if there would be the elections? Question one. Ukrainian who left the country temporarily, because we hope many would return, there are millions of people. Would they have a vote? No. So there won't be possible, Ukraine wants normal elections, good elections, but not elections where important part of the society won't be able to vote. Would the observers come to Ukraine? No, they won't. And can you imagine if Ukraine does this miracle of having the elections in basement? Still, one attack somewhere, not in Kyiv, but somewhere in Odessa during election day, would kind of create, and the fact that at that day Russia can just, bomb the country as much as possible is possible. So it's the realistic, so it's really a lot, the public understanding. So there is a general perception. What is also very important, and people who Ukrainians care a lot, Ukraine lacks funds. Ukraine lacks funds for ammunition, for the pensions, for these things, for the army. And then there would be the question, are you really going to do this expensive campaign for what? Because to be honest, during the war it's happening, that usually people vote for those who are still in power. So most probably that most of the mayors will stay the same. With the president, it's interesting. The Ukrainian opposition isn't really welcoming these elections with a different idea, because they think the longer Zelensky is on power, the less popular he becomes. So the further are the elections, there would be more chances that they have a candidate to challenge, because there is no candidate, a strong candidate to challenge. So I think that there is the particular common sense in this regard. But I would think that next year, we will really, there would be some idea, because one thing is like a year, the second year after the term, but not really longer. So I won't totally rule out the opportunity of the elections, but there should be very strong preparation. Ukraine has very developed online system, but I think the problem with that we want the elections people trust. And wherever you think with a system which is not 100% sure, there would be the challenge. Even if there would be absolutely fair elections online, somebody would say, somebody would challenge them. So I think that I'm very cautious that there would be a lot of last year in the Republican, in the US, in some of the Republican pundits like Tucker Carlson and the others,
we discussed, one of our colleagues, the very famous Ukrainian election observation organization, recorded the campaign, that there is a whole campaign saying like Ukraine is not democracy because there was no elections. We kind of said that like it was really on the American ultra-conservative Twitter. We think that this would happen as well, this type of the campaigns, but what I explained is common sense. But I believe like if Ukrainians would think that there is a time to change, they would be very vocal. They would be very vocal, and there would be the discussion how to do these elections.
Okay, so just to sum up, right? You spoke about these alleged horrible war crimes, and that Russia's troops are in violation of all the war crimes, like in a systematic way, the ones that are specified in the Geneva Conventions. And you also spoke about this, like your work to fight this plan of impunity. Because those words were really strong ones. I just wanted you to give you this time so as to invite you to say anything else you want to say that we didn't ask. That's it.
To finalize that, and I can speak in details about that, but I probably won't. I think that the very important thing to understand is scale. And that again, like I would repeat it myself, but I'm speaking about the systematic crimes which are happening. And first of all, it's really about the occupation. One thing which is very difficult for us, especially if you're a journalist, which world we are living in. For lawyers, the bigger evidence is there. It's kind of the better, the more solid it is. The more similar crimes are, you can speak about, how you have the system and you're like more solid in how you can prove it. Unfortunately for the journalists, it's quite an opposite. The more similar attacks are, the less interest it is. So there would be tens, very similar attack, very similar missiles attack. And that would be another story. I remember very early when the whole story, when there was liberation of the Izum, very often, very fast, big international publications said, like, we already published one story of the torture. We already published, but they are happening. So for me, it's really the idea is to speak about all these individual stories and first of all, not justify the occupation. Again, because the things which are happening, and I think this is the biggest discussion globally, why Ukrainians, are they crazy, why they disagree on any kind of truth or something. Because it's also the biggest difference is like, do you allow people to suffer? It's the question, it's this bargain. How many of your military, which are usually civilians, who are going and risking their life, you can die trying to liberate the town, to liberate the other people in the detention. So that would be the one thing. But the second is the very common question for me would be, like how you can work with that. It's a very drastic topic. It's horrible to listen to understand about this experience. But I'm extremely fascinated and inspired because all the people I talk to and our team talk to, they believe in this justice. They are ready to speak. Recently we have one story of the local prosecutor in Mykolaiv region, who her town is shelled. She investigated crimes in her own town. She go into the smaller villages, talking to the people. At night, she can be in the shelter. And when there is a question why she is rushing so much, she just very seriously saying I don't know how much time we have. I don't know how long we live. I don't know how we survive. So I think this idea that we need this urgency, that's also very important. But I'll finish up with also the quote of the one of our survivors. She was in Kramatorsk, I told, in train station. Her husband has been killed in a very horrible way, but she survived herself. And She's a religious person who was volunteering there, and I asked her, why do you talk to me? Because a lot of people speak about retribution, about the punishment, about the answer for those people. And she said that, look, I'm religious, it's just God who punished these people, I'm not there. But my life is ruined, so I want to stop that somebody else's life is not ruined. So I think that was a very powerful explanation. The other thing which is also very important, a lot of people are pushing Ukraine to some kind of a compromise. And to be honest, with that amount of the war crimes, I think Ukrainians, somewhere deep, understand that all of them won't be ever investigated. We understand that 125,000 won't be investigated, that maybe not every Russian soldier who was there would be there. Maybe Vladimir Putin wouldn't be in The Hague. However, one of the priests, I'm also going to refer to him, in Bucha, it was his church, he was like trying to solve the issue and help to bury the first executed there. He just said it very clearly, he said like, look, for my community in Bucha, we just think that, if there won't be justice, there will be revenge. And the revenge is not our way. It's very hard to me to explain what is not our way, but like in the words, but I understand. So I think Ukrainians already accepted that, we won't go for revenge. We already agreed that we agreed for partial justice, which we know would be partial. We know that everybody will be punished, but we already made this compromise that we will avoid revenge, but let's go for the justice at least. And I think that's very important to understand when there is a push for Ukrainians to compromise even more. Because I also think that let's at least strive for justice instead of this idea of the revenge, because we also don't want to enforce it to our society. And I think everybody understands how drastic the idea of the revenge is. So let's us stick to the idea of justice at least and do everything possible, because, things are happening and we believe things might happen, and some of the words, some of the indictments will be there. At least let's do what we can. And thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and everyone who is present. Thank you so much. So on Thursday, we're going to make another presentation. I just tell the audience in the Centro Cultural Regoleta. So she's going to do something like this as well. So over to you.
Thank you.
Okay.